Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast. I'm your host, Christian Harris, and we've got a big episode this week, which is our first annual predictions show. This might be a crazy idea, but I think it's a really interesting episode, actually. I think you're going to really enjoy it. It's been a lot of work putting it together, but well worth it. So what have we done? We've gone out and we've got predictions for the year 2022 in safety and risk from a range of safety and risk professionals, indeed from around the world, all sorts of sectors, all sorts of roles, different focuses from safety to insurance and everything in between, and we've pulled those together into this episode. So today we're going to be sharing those predictions. Some of them are emails or messages I've had, others are where people have been kind enough to do videos to share with us today, and we're bunching them together because you'll see there's a few key trends that come through. And the idea of this is firstly to share and collaborate and learn from each other, but it's also to enable us in a year's time to look back on this and review this episode and find out who is the prognosticator, the king or queen of prognostication in safety and risk, and who are the fools who get all of their predictions wrong. No, don't worry, we won't actually be calling people fools, but I do think it'll be interesting to look back in a year's time and see, where our predictions were, where they were right, where they were wrong, and do the same thing all over again next year. So I hope you enjoy this. There's 29 guests today, biggest podcast by far in terms of the number of guests. And at the end, I'll give you some of my predictions as well. Cheers. Okay, so let's make a start with the predictions then. As I was analysing these, I was bunching them up into categories, and there were four big themes that really shone through to me. So let's make a start with the first one of those, which is all around changes to the workplace and the world of work, and how from 2022 and moving forward, these will be fundamentally different to how they were before. We'll start with a prediction from Louise Hosking, who has recently become the president of IOSH. And Louise's prediction is that a revolution in our approach to capitalism, fueled by skills shortages and people choosing organisations where their health, safety, and well-being are valued. Now that really resonated with me, and that's one of the reasons I put Louise's prediction up first. And I'm going to talk about some of my predictions for 2022 at the end of the episode. Let's get on to the next prediction. This comes from Crystal Danbury, who has appeared as a guest on the podcast before. As a reminder, she heads up safety and insurance for the supermarket group Sainsbury's. And Crystal's predictions were that we'll have a U-turn on working from home as people and performance begin to struggle due to isolation. Secondly, she predicts that we'll start to see people talk about the personal impact and losses from COVID, because in 2021, we weren't. Third, Crystal predicts we'll see another variant, but we'll take a business as usual, mask on approach to dealing with that. And lastly, she thinks that we're going to see some safety fatigue from people as we merge business as usual, keeping you safe, with no, we don't care about COVID anymore, it's all over. So a bit of a sign of safety fatigue and risk saturation. Thanks to Crystal for sharing her predictions. Next up, we've got a video.
Hi Christian, it's Keiran Kerswell, Safety Improvement Manager at Abellio here. Just two predictions for 2022. I think first of all, flexible working, remote working, hybrid working is here to stay. And it would have been about 2 years since a lot of businesses introduced these types of workings quite quickly. I think 2022 will be the year where we start to see a lot of the potential safety issues come to the fore, especially in the media. So I'm talking things like household fires whilst working from home, musculoskeletal issues, and I've got no doubt there'll also be some sad mental health stories told about being alone and working. And as a result, my prediction is that I think the HSE will issue new guidance surrounding home working and potentially look to introduce new legislation at some point. My final prediction really is a bit of a curveball. And it's a tightening up of the 2012 asbestos regs due to new evidence potentially showing the perseverance of asbestos within the UK building infrastructure and the continued impact upon cardiovascular health of the population that that's causing. Have a great new year.
Thanks to Keiran for taking the time to send a video in, and we've got a number of other videos coming up as well. By the way, whilst I remember, really keen to get your feedback on all of these predictions, so do join in on social media. I use LinkedIn as my primary channel, but I am active on others as well. So do join into the discussion and let us know some feedback on these predictions. And if you want to make your own on social media, then you're more than welcome to. Let's move on then to Nigel and hear his predictions. This is Nigel Graham of Vesuvius PLC, and here's what Nigel wrote to me. We and others saw an unpredicted safety bonus in the COVID year of 2020. Maybe you did as well. Whilst the pandemic grey swan was predicted for years, but ignored by governments who slashed public health budgets, what wasn't predicted was the response by individuals and companies to actually improve their safety performance. Is this anecdotally true globally? Perhaps co-working was reduced, or being at home safer than commuting, being at work, or maybe home injuries went unreported, or many people paid more attention to safety. I don't know, but here are my predictions. There are various surveys, but most say that hybrid working is here to stay. Workers are working extended hours as they work their commutes, still increasing stress with long-term effects. The accident rates will bounce a little back due to awareness fatigue and return to work, but stay down compared to 2019. And finally, reduced social interaction will make for more insularity and mental health issues that will only surface in the longer term. Thanks for that, Nigel. And Nigel's picked up on a few of the other big themes that we're going to carry on discussing as this podcast continues. But next, let's move on to another friend of the podcast and a previous guest, Ian Davies. So as you'll recall, if you listened to my interview with Ian, Ian heads up risk management in the pharmaceutical industry and so has a very wide-ranging responsibility to look at the business and the risks facing it, and his predictions reflect that. So he's given us a few categories of predictions. Firstly is geopolitical uncertainty. Ian says this will probably increase in 2022, not least because both Russia and China seem to be prepared to flex their military muscle. Whilst direct combat between Western and Eastern powers seems unlikely, this will have an impact on global trade and inflation. Trouble on the Russian and Ukraine border will result in energy shortages and continued upward inflationary pressure for businesses. And just as a side note from me, obviously we're living through that right now, and Ian made this prediction in December, so that was very prescient of him. US and Chinese tensions, along with Russian tensions, will probably result in trade sanctions, again, leading to inflationary pressure. And interest rates in the West will go up, resulting in more expensive borrowing for businesses. The second category that Ian has talked about is COVID. So the data on the Omicron variant has some positive signs. Again, this was made in December. Although the variant is more transmissible, the severity of the disease could be reducing. This is to be expected as COVID follows the course of other respiratory viruses. The issue for business, and in particular health services, is the numbers of workers off, either with the disease itself or isolating because someone close to them has had the disease. It's already apparent that absence rates were higher than any point in the pandemic. On a positive note, says Ian, future variants will hopefully show the trend to less severe infection, and by the end of 2022, we might be seeing the infection as something we live with, just like influenza. I believe we will see at least annual vaccinations, but immunity and resistance in the population will increase. Businesses will need to marshal resources to cope with capacity restraints carefully. Restrictions will be modified in countries, as we've seen in the run-up to the Christmas holidays. As the UK government has done, targeted help for the most affected businesses will be forthcoming. We can, however, expect a host of business failures. Thirdly, Ian talks about economic recovery, and he says we can expect the economy to recover. However, businesses will need to manage the tension between returning to the office and working from home. It's become apparent that hybrid working is the way forward for a number of workers, However, it's important to maintain face-to-face contact. Contact is important to foster trust between workers, the culture of the business, but most importantly, good mental health of the workforce. The employees who have struggled most over the past years are those on their own or trying to balance childcare. Those workers need support, and mental health should be a high priority for businesses in the coming years. We're going to go into mental health and some further predictions on that as the episode continues. The last topic that Ian touches on is the climate and sustainability. Again, something he and I spoke about, and I know an area that he has a passion for. And this is also something we'll be touching upon a bit more later in the episode. Ian says, COP26 showed us that it's important that we start the journey to net zero. It would appear that some increased legislation will be enacted in 2022. Keeping abreast of the changes will be an important priority for multinational businesses. It's apparent, though, that the chances of keeping below the 1.5 degrees Celsius are very low. This means businesses have to do the following: be ambitious and take the lead. Hopefully this attitude can be a positive for many other businesses, leading to better customer loyalty and attracting more investment from ethical funds. Thanks to Ian for the considerable amount of thought that he clearly put into his prediction. So let's see in a year's time how accurate Ian's prediction is. Next, we've got another video, this time from Scott Crichton of WorkNest, who has also appeared on the podcast before. Over to you, Scott.
Hi everyone, my name's Scott Crichton and I am a Principal Health and Safety Consultant with WorkNest. My predictions for 2022 for safety and risk would be that we will probably see more instability, particularly around about COVID. I think we would probably all agree that that's not going to be going away anytime soon. We'll probably see claims coming from COVID, particularly working from home. So we may see a reform of the DSE regulations, display screen equipment regulations. We may see some large claims. We've already seen a claim in Germany where somebody's tripped over something at home. We'll probably see more instability and people being concerned for their own health, safety and well-being as well. So we may see something on that as well. And we'll probably see more instability with regards to the regulatory reform and fire safety and confusion within the fire sector as well. Hopefully we are all professionals that can deal with these predictions and we can foresee what's coming ahead of us. We can put in place the necessary measures in order to prevent those things from happening in the first place. Have a great Christmas and a great New Year, and speak soon. Bye.
Next, we've got some predictions from Eddie Udoh, who is a safety professional who's worked in Africa and the Middle East and who runs some great safety webinar events. If those are of interest, you should check those out on LinkedIn. Let's hear what Eddie's got to say. So firstly, COVID-19 will still be around for a while. So managing the new variants will mean organizations being proactive and putting stringent measures in place. There will be poor crisis management in many organizations and countries. I expect more travel restrictions. Technology will be used more and more for site safety audits and inspections to avoid human interactions due to COVID-19. And finally, most employees will be working from home and a thorough risk assessment will be carried out on employees' homes. Thanks for that, Eddie. And we've got another prediction from overseas with Michael Fitzpatrick, who's a nuclear safety specialist from Canada. And Michael says this: with everything that has happened all over the world with COVID, I do not believe that the power to coerce the public will be ceded by the authorities in an effort to return to pre-2019. My prediction is that the health and safety public good genie is out of the bottle, and for good. Regarding Industry 4.0 and AI, a SWOT analysis will be required to see what side of the socio-technical future you're on. With workplaces becoming incongruent with past, Industry 4.0 and artificial intelligence interventions will surely fill the gap, as stated by the World Economic Forum founder and executive chairman, Klaus Schwab, who asserts that the changes seen are more than just improvements to efficiency, but express a significant shift in industrial capitalism. This transformation of traditional manufacturing and industrial practices, combined with the latest smart technology, will undoubtedly alter the current work methodology forever, and conversely with workers seeking to be productive from remote home locales. Whether we will look back at the 20th century work practices with a sense of incredulity and the future with a sense of positivity remains to be seen. On working from home and the Great Resignation, the nature of work life will be different going forward. The precedent has been set and there's no going back. Any company attempting to persist with the notion of work in the office will soon find themselves struggling to retain top-class workforce employees who, understandably, are seeking to maximize their value with a better quality of home-life balance. I also expect there will be a shift in the workforce seeking to extricate themselves from manufacturing roles, stood on a line making a widget, for example, to a role that can be performed from home. Finally, workplace and home life mental health will become inextricably linked, with work managers not being able to differentiate between the two. Leave your problems at home will no longer be an acceptable mantra, as home life and its all-pervasive issues must be factored into the work scope, as these home life issues are part of the employee's makeup arriving to complete a day's work. Thanks for that, Michael. And we've got another North American prediction now from Jeff Waldron, who works for the insurance brokerage Willis Towers Watson. Here's what Jeff predicts for 2022. Firstly, companies will struggle with the growing remote worker environment as the world reopens, specifically as workers' comp claims associated with ergonomics and uncontrolled remote worker environments increase. It will blur the line between worker flexibility and the lack of control for a worker's environment. With that lack of control on the work environment, so desk, chair, monitor, office space, peripherals, etc., organizations will struggle to maintain consistency with an ever-growing fractured workplace. Secondly, and this is quite a North American prediction I would suggest, as the world reopens, I'd expect that we'll see an increase with incidents of workplace violence. Specifically, we may see an increase of shootings at the job in the US, with the turmoil and anxiety associated with vaccine protocols, PPE, variant spikes, etc. Employee stress levels will build and will be expected to spill over into an increase in incidents of workplace violence. Thanks for that, Jeff. And many of these predictions we would wish to come true, but hopefully your second one we won't be correct about when we come to review this at the beginning of 2023. Next, we've got another overseas prediction. Really thrilled to have lots of predictions from around the world today on the podcast. And these predictions come from James Ritchie and Bronwyn Smart, who are executive directors of the Mindful Risk Group in Australia. And here are their predictions in safety and risk for 2022. First, continued volatility in global supply chains for both goods and people. Think AdBlue, the Great Resignation, Australia's ridiculous border policies, ongoing trade tensions with China, and more. Second, risk frameworks in organizations that are concise and easy to follow. Many of our clients are considering removing the risk matrix and replacing it with a prioritization process. Three, due to the ongoing isolation caused by the last 2 years, people and organizations will be looking to create opportunities to build communities and connections, and most Australian companies will be forced to embrace a hybrid model of working to avoid losing key people. Specifically moving away from risk towards safety, they have 3 predictions. First, vaccine mandates and cases of COVID in the workplace will continue to create complex liability issues for employers in Western nations. Second, organizations will be forced to adopt safety technology solutions that reduce system complexity. For example, in Australia, there's been a large swing away from complex document-heavy safety management systems and a move to agile platform-based systems. And third, psychological safety in the workplace will continue to be a challenge for employers as they manage hybrid workforces and the impacts of the last 2 years. Thanks, guys, for giving us your 2 cents. And we'll round off this first topic area, shall we say, albeit we are crossing over into other areas as well, of course, with a video from Michelle Pitkin.
My name's Michelle Pitkin and I am the Health and Safety Advisor for Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service. The past 18 months has seen the world of work and the health and safety profession be faced with situations and challenges that we've never had to face before. But during this time, we've worked together to find and put in place solutions to overcome these. As we leave 2021 and look towards 2022, I feel that we were looking to establish the new normal. Be it agile working, home working, or hybrid working, whatever we do, we need to ensure that the controls and the solutions that we have in place are right and suitable for our employees. Be it technology, equipment, the working environment, policies or procedures, they need to be suitable for everyone and they need to support everyone. I see the role of the Health and Safety Advisor continuing to grow and develop as we move forward in establishing that new normal. I see the role as one where we're not just advisors or compliance checkers, but a role which is helping organisations find practical solutions to overcome the issues being faced, and where we can find solutions that can be worked with on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks very much for that, Michelle, and let's hope that the spirit that you outlined there will be enacted in 2022. So, as I say, we have been jumping around a little bit because what I've not wanted to do is break up people's predictions, but those were the predictions that we had that centered around this new world of work and what's that going to look like in terms of hybrid working and what are some of the risks that come as a result of that. The second dominant theme, which we've already seen noted in a number of the predictions, is, of course, the C word, COVID. Hopefully this time next year we might be able to say we're beyond it, but or at least we're beyond the worst. We keep having these false dawns, but let's see. So let's go into a few predictions now from people which are centered around COVID, but again, there are some additional topics discussed as well. Here's the prediction from Alex Kalantirenka from Unispace. Omicron becomes the dominant coronavirus variant. People stop dying from COVID and only very mild symptoms appear. The World Health Organization reduced COVID to endemic, similar to seasonal flu. Life comes back to normal, or the new normal, should we say, as some level restrictions are still in place in various countries. Thanks, Alex. And I think that is one prediction that we would all hope does come true in 2022. Seamus Higgins of Vraxis Safety Solutions has a slightly different take, though, because his predictions, which are fairly brief, include 2 points, the first of which is lockdown 4.0. Now, sorry to say, Seamus, I really hope you're wrong on that one, but we shall see if you are a prognosticator when we come to review these predictions at the end of the year. His other prediction, which again I hope doesn't happen, is another tower fire in London. So 2021, there were a couple of those, and Seamus's view is that we will see another. Peter Bowen sent in a prediction, and I've got to include it, even though it's I think it's cheating. I think it's fair to say you might agree with me. But his prediction was that there'll be another new variant of COVID, and his view is that he's pretty safe with that one. I think I'd agree with that that's a pretty safe prediction, but we shall see. Next up, we've got another prediction from Australia. So this comes from Josef Brennan, who's the Safety and Engineering Director of Yarra Trains in Melbourne, which is a beautiful part of the world. And here are his predictions for 2022. So firstly, a very interesting legal landscape with COVID claims and prosecutions. He expects both civil and criminal claims. Not sure what the situation is in the UK, but certainly in Australia, case law hasn't quite caught up yet. There is a coronial inquest into an aged care facility, as 46 residents died of COVID. And vaccine mandates have led to people not longer being able to work, which could lead to cases taken to a Fair Work Commission. So Joseph's view is that 2022 will be interesting. I think we can all agree that 2022 will be an interesting year. Next up, we've got a prediction from Portugal. This comes from André Santos, who is Quality, Continuous Improvement, Safety and Environment Director over in Portugal. And he says that he doesn't see any major breakouts of new trends, but a consolidation on some trends. Firstly, concerns about COVID and other variants, or indeed other viruses. Secondly, a shortage of workers for low or medium paying jobs that can't easily be replaced by automation. Third, an increase in use of automation and artificial intelligence in services and industries. And fourth, high costs for insurance as they are having bad years by now. Obrigado, Andre, for your predictions. And let's hear now what Donna Nodson has to say. So Donna echoes the view that it's been an interesting couple of years. The risk landscape has changed quite a bit. 2 years into the pandemic, we've learned to live with some aspects of it, but the ebbs and flows continue to cause changing government guidance. That has certainly been a challenge to keep pace with, a risk that will continue for the foreseeable future. Though recent times working remotely has become more commonplace, while companies endeavour to keep everyone as safe as possible, it's important to balance the risk of COVID with other risks employees are dealing with, such as mental health. Some people have done quite well with working from home. For others, this has been more of a hardship. Thirdly, business travel will likely increase. This requires consideration on how best to support vaccination, boosters and testing requirements as part of the way we work. Companies may be faced with an employee that finds out they have COVID-19 during the course of a business trip, which requires additional support for the duration of their recovery. Thanks for that, Donna, and we shall see how accurate those predictions become. Certainly from my perspective, I've been reluctant to travel overseas, and indeed haven't done since the pandemic, because I've been worried about what would happen if I contract the virus when I'm overseas, and will that be covered by insurance, and what kind of challenges will that produce? So I can certainly see where you're coming from there. So we've covered off the first of the two big trends and themes that came through from everyone's feedback. And now the two other dominant ones, some of which we have touched upon already, are all around the climate emergency and sustainability and the environment, and then around mental health. So again, we've touched on some of that before, but those were the four key themes that came through. So we'll try and move through those in a more or less sequential way. We've now got another video, so let's join that.
Hi, I'm Samsul Arifin, safety professional at Enric Company in Indonesia. I have 3 predictions for 2022 safety trend. The first one is the gap between work as done versus work as imagined will continue to grow, since there were a lot of restrictions were made during the last 2 years to limit the interaction among workers for good cause to stop COVID-19 transmission. However, in other hand, there is downside of it. A lot of safety practitioners and leaders also reduce their visit to field, which makes them less aware with the current practices on site. The second one, there will be a more violent natural disaster due to climate change, which will eventually cause business interruption and, most importantly, putting workers to greater risk due to unpredictable consequences that might be missed during the risk assessment or emergency mitigation planning. The last one, or the third one, is that the mental health issue. The work dynamic change, such as intense web meeting, work from home, or remote working setup, the new adaptation or the balance between home and work pressure, and the need to keep making money or stay in the job, while continue to stay away from the deadly SARS-CoV-2 virus. Those kind of things can cause a lot of stress that cannot be ignored. That's all my 3 safety trend prediction for 2022. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Really appreciate you taking the time to produce video. And another prediction, quite a brief one because it came on a tweet from the team at Ciarrocca, is all around the weather. So let's see what they've got to say. A positive one here, as you can see if you're watching this, or if not, I'll read it out to you. We'll see more companies better preparing their teams for severe weather. Next, we're moving into the offshore oil and gas industry with a prediction from Azerbaijan. Who knew that the Safety and Risk Success podcast was getting around the world in such a big way? It's great to see. So this comes from ZAUR BASHIROV, and this is what ZAUR says. Taking into account global climate changes and considering that my company is engaged in the development of oil and gas at sea, these changes will undoubtedly affect our activities. 1. Increased frequency and duration of strong winds and storms will result in greater stress on offshore facilities and pipelines. 2. The drop in sea level due to global warming will create a problem with the movement of ships. For example, the Caspian Sea. In the whole world, its process ocean level will increase. As a result, the company will have to use more helicopters, and this will lead to higher costs. 3. The effect of corrosion on offshore facilities and pipelines will increase. And under the influence of external factors, the risk of failure of offshore facilities will increase too. 4. Cost savings for inspections and repairs of facilities and pipelines will also lead to an increase in the risk of their failure. 5. To compensate for the loss of destroyed facilities, managers will start to demand more hard work from their staff, which will lead to hasty activities, and this will also increase the risk of incidents and accidents. And finally, due to stabilised oil prices, it will be possible to plan activities in more detail. Thanks for giving your predictions. Offshore oil and gas is not an industry I know much about, so really interesting to hear about some of the things that are going on there. Next, Will Taylor has sent in a prediction, and that is that the health and safety community will continue to ignore the issue of exposing our employees to levels of CO2 that greatly exceed both the STEL and LTEL and EH40 and COSH when wearing face coverings. Thanks for sharing that with us, Will. And again, that's a prediction that I'm sure we all agree, we hope perhaps doesn't come true in 2022. Next up, we've got a video from Rebecca Lambert of HSE People, who has also appeared on the podcast before when we did a roundtable all around the risks and opportunities of reopening after the lockdown. Over to you, Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Lambert and I am the marketing manager of HSE People. HSE People is an online network of professionals who work within health and safety, the environment and sustainability, and risk and compliance. We provide our members with free resources to help them do their job as well as possible. And this includes things like our job board, events calendar, news, information about white papers, ebooks, webinars, and also the latest products and services. My prediction for 2022 is that there's going to be an increased awareness of the importance of protecting the environment, and that companies are going to realise that it's not just about making a profit, but that they also have to run their business effectively and reducing the harm that they do to the environment at the same time.
Thanks for sharing that, Rebecca, and we will see in a year's time how you've done with your predictions. Continuing our overseas theme, we're now going to Namibia, a beautiful part of the world, with Horst Simon, who is passionate about risk culture. And Horst made 3 predictions, which actually he's put out in a LinkedIn post, but he's asked me to share them here with you on the podcast as well. 1, the biggest risk is still hanging on to the dead 3 lines of defence concept that was outdated for a long time and died in 2020. So many job advertisements still refer to that, and even so-called expert papers still talk about 3 lines of defence. It just shows how far back in the past these organisations live. Second on my list is the risk of believing the fallacy of risk assurance. So much time and effort is spent on something with virtually no value and no contribution to the actual effective management of risk. And the last of his top 3 is the risk of getting caught up in focusing on a risk that does not exist. There's no such thing as conduct risk. Conduct is the outcome of either bad or effective people risk management. Thanks for that, Horst, and we're hoping to get a time and day agreed for Horst to appear for a full interview on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. coming up in 2022. So that's a mini prediction from me. Speaking of podcast guests, recently I had the pleasure of chatting to STEFAN GERSHATER, and we had a really, really fascinating and very thought-provoking and discussion-provoking interview about the risk management profession, and STEFAN's kindly given us a prediction for 2022 as well. And if you listened to the podcast with STEFAN, we touched upon this a little bit, but STEFAN's prediction for 2022 is that it's the year that quantum computing finally makes a big impact in the world. One of the areas we've talked a little bit about in the past on the podcast is insurance and the insurance cycle in terms of the changes of premium levels over time. And we've got a prediction on that now from the USA. This comes from Brian Ciarrocca. Apologies if I've butchered your name, Brian, who's a risk management associate for RU Insurance in New Jersey. And Brian's prediction is that from an insurance standpoint, I would definitely expect rate increases, in other words, premiums going up. Depending on the line of insurance, some of these increases may be pretty significant. So that's definitely something to be on your radar in the year ahead, what's happening with insurance prices, because those are big chunks of expenditure that are committed every year. So definitely something that you want to have on the back of your mind and be thinking about what you can do to mitigate those rises through, as you'd expect me to say, but actually it's true, a proactive approach to safety and risk management. We've got another video now from Australia from a previous guest on the podcast, Anton Guinea. So over to you, Anton.
Hi, Anton Guinea here from the Guinea Group of Companies. I think my predictions for 2022 in the area of workplace health and safety are these, and there's three of them. The first one is that I feel psychological safety will become important in organisations. I think we've talked about it for a long time, but we haven't done it enough. And I think 2022 is the year of psych safety, and with organisations understanding that people bring their whole selves, that emotional fitness is as important as physical fitness. So I think that's going to be a big change and a step change for us. I think that industrial manslaughter is also going to be a big issue in 2022, with leaders and directors at all levels of organisations really unpacking what it means to be legally responsible, even though we always have for workplace health and safety. I think that's going to be elevated now in Australia, particularly now that industrial manslaughter laws are in place. And the third one is going to be leadership. I think leaders are going to step up in 2022, and I think that even today, it's 7:25 where I am now. I've already had a conversation this morning about safety leadership. And so I think that leadership in general and safety leadership in particular are going to be a real focus for 2022. And I think we're going to see leadership elevated in the safety space. All the best to you and yours for 2022. And I can't wait to hear whether these predictions come true. Reach out, www.theguineagroup.com.au. Check out a blog post that I've written on this, and look forward to hearing from you, hearing your feedback about what you think the predictions are in 2022. Have a great year.
Thanks for that, Anton. Much appreciated. Really good of you to take the time to make a video. And Alex Tomkins shares your view about psychological safety. Let's hear what Alex has to say. So Alex has written to me and says, personally, I think we're going to see a focus shift to psychological safety and its importance in the workplace. I also think there's going to be a renewed global focus of large companies and their responsibilities to workers' safety following the tornadoes in Kentucky late last year. And thanks to Michelle Griffey from Communicis for our penultimate prediction, which is as follows. I believe as we enter 2022, risk will remain around cyber attack for all companies. However, economic risks are likely to emerge strongly following the pressure on businesses through the last 2 years and on individuals as they cope with rising prices across the board. There's a culture of buy now, pay later, and many individuals are heavily indebted, so even a small interest rate rise could hit hard. Coupled with wider pressures, we are likely to see pressure on ability to repay borrowing and knock-on pressures to small businesses as belts are tightened. Thanks for your input, Michelle. And finally, from our guest predictions today, we've got Andy Reid, who is a safety professional in the health and fitness sector, and Andy's got some predictions around the topic of safety and risk, but actually thinking about the broader spectrum of health specifically, and how the leisure centre sector can play its role in creating better health outcomes for the country. Let's hear from Andy.
Hi everyone. Christian's asked me to make some predictions for 2022. I'm Andy Reid and I've worked in this great industry for over 40 years. In 2022, I hope that the leisure sector becomes recognised as the non-medical part of the health sector. The second prediction on my wish list is that I hope leisure managers become health and wellbeing managers, recognised as facilitators of health, physical and mental fitness within their communities, and not just confined to the buildings that they're operating. Third, I hope that leisure centres fully embrace their local communities. The leisure management sector, I hope, will be able to have one voice representing the whole of the sector. Not just fitness, not just sport, not just health, but the whole sector that we operate in. Oh, and the final one, of course, from me, is that everyone is responsible. I'd love that to really come through really strongly in 2022.
So there we have it, guys. Those are the predictions for safety and risk in 2022. I hope you enjoyed listening to those as much as I did, and it certainly got my mind whirring and turning as to what's going to happen in the year ahead. I suppose it would be remiss of me to not give some predictions of my own. So I think what I'm going to do is call upon a couple of the themes that were touched on by some of the guests in their predictions. And there's a reason I started with Louise and ended with Andy, I suppose. I believe that we're at a tipping point now when it comes to safety and risk and our role as safety and risk professionals in the world. I think that, as we've heard today, people are just not going to accept anymore not being looked after properly and not having the right conditions and not having the right work-life balance. And so it really is a matter of survival now for companies to get this right, to put safety and risk at the top of the agenda, to, as Paul O'Neill talked about in the Christmas episode of the podcast that I shared, make sure that safety is not a priority, it's a precondition. And I think with Generation Z or whatever generation we're on now, I'm getting old, that's going to be really, really important to them. They're interested in working for companies that are looking after the environment and the broader spectrum of safety and health. They're interested in supporting and buying from companies that do the same. So I do think that we've got a chance in 2022, with the woods cleared a little bit from COVID, let's hope, but still that ongoing importance of safety and risk having been risen to the top of the agenda to make a real impact. And so my prediction is that we, as a group of steadfast and ambitious safety and risk professionals, can achieve that drive forward in 2022. So let's see in a year's time, at the end of 2022 or in early 2023, who's been correct, who's been a prognosticator, and who's been a fool. No, I said I wouldn't use that word. It just makes me laugh saying fool for some reason. Looking forward to that. We're gonna review this. We're gonna see whose predictions were closest to the mark, and we'll do this exercise again next year. It's been fun, albeit a lot of work. It's been fun for me to go through this, and I've certainly really enjoyed doing it. So thanks very much for staying with us. I hope you've got value from this, and you've also got your mind turning as to what's ahead in the year to come. If you have enjoyed it, if you have got value from it, I'd really appreciate you hitting the follow button on your podcast platform of choice, or if you're watching this on YouTube, then on there. I'd really appreciate you talking about this on social media. So my primary platform is LinkedIn, but I'm active in other places as well. Join the conversation there, and put up a post if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it to your network and friends, and let's get more people joining in the conversation. I'll be back next week with another episode and an interview for you, and I'll be back next year reviewing these results. So I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Cheers.